Hey guys, this is Fourth and Snarky. Okay, before I get into my favorite games of this week, I want to talk about something that's been bugging me since preseason, the dynamic kickoff. Listen, I know it's supposed to keep players safer and it's supposed to promote higher scoring games and blah, 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 whatever Roger Goodell wants to push this week. But the problem is, it's just not fun to watch. I mean, we have all watched games where players get that ball in the end zone and run it all the way back for a touchdown. Those are the fun kickoffs. Whatever this is not great. The amount of penalties and touchbacks, and it's just boring. I said it. It's boring. I wish they would go back. But I know that's not going to happen because Roger Goodell is always right about everything. Let's get into these games. First, we're going to start with the Bills and the Dolphins. I'm going to break it into two halves only because, listen, that second half was just a mess for so many reasons. But let's talk about the least surprising thing about this game. Odell Beckham Jr. still hurt. Who would have guessed? I mean, he has to be the luckiest player in the NFL. He gets to play maybe 6 games a season. Maybe. Because there's always something wrong with him. Hell, he's even gotten Super Bowl rings for just playing one game. I mean, he gets so much money and does so little, and he's so hyped up. He is not the wide receiver that everybody thinks he is. He's a joke. Yes, for those 1 or 2 games, you may get something magical out of him, but it's not worth his contract price. Okay, the Dolphins came out looking weak. I mean, they looked weak last week as well, but they pulled it together in the second half of last week. This was not the same thing. I hate even saying this, but Tua is a mid quarterback at best. First half, they couldn't get into any rhythm. He was throwing interceptions and fumbling. I mean, it was just bad. The Bills took advantage of that, rightfully so. I mean, if you're playing them and they're going to start making all of these mistakes, of course you're going to exploit them. James Cook had an amazing first half of the game. There's no denying that. And Josh Allen also looked great. Not gonna lie though, he didn't put up the numbers for my fantasy team this week, so I was a little disappointed with him. In the first half, with 2 minutes left, the Dolphins had the ball. They should have went to a hurry up, but McDaniels didn't do that. Now, listen, I'm not a head coach, but I've watched enough football that if you're lagging by that many points, you should be going into a hurry up because they could have scored. But just like last week, they were down going into the first half. Not surprising, but the fact that they could have came back was still in the back of everybody's mind, and there was still hope for the Dolphins fans. At the beginning of the second half, Tua threw a pick six to Ingram, and it was great. That next drive, though, I mean, man. Listen, Tua got that concussion, and even in real time, I turned to my husband and I was like, this is the end of his career. We literally just watched the end of his career. Tua getting that concussion, I mean, it brought you back to 2022. Like, he has had 4 official concussions in his career. That is a lot. And those are just the official ones. Who knows how many he's actually had that just weren't reported. It was heartbreaking to watch. It's just sad because he's such a young player and he deserves so much better than this. I've seen people online saying this is Damar Hamlin's fault and that this is just further proof that he's a clone. Listen, that's just some Aaron Rodgers level conspiracy theories. This wasn't his fault. To be honest, it was Tua's fault. He should have slid. There was no reason for him to drop his head. I know that these games can be intense and you want to win. Hell, the fans want you to do it. But realistically, you shouldn't. There's a ton of debate going on right now whether he should retire, he shouldn't retire. No one has come out definitively and said what the long-term repercussions of this is. I mean, we've seen it in some of these players, but even hearing Sherman talk about just the players that he knows who have retired recently who have had a ton of concussions, I think he should retire. I don't know. I wouldn't risk my family like that. So it's not my decision. And I'm sure a lot of fans think that, oh, this is normal. And to be honest, it is. The amount of concussions that these players get is huge. The amount of reported concussions is a lot smaller. So while they're saying he's had 4 in his career, I bet that number is a lot higher. The rest of the game was pretty uneventful. I can't blame them though. Most of those players were just upset after this happened. And who wouldn't be? You just watched your franchise quarterback go down. What are you expected to do? You're not going to go out there and give it your all. No, you're upset. Then seeing your backup go out there and God just not be great. I don't know. There were no great plays. There were no scores. The Bills did play a very clean game, and the refs weren't bad. So I guess that's a win. Okay, let's talk about the Browns and the Jaguars. Going into this game, I didn't realize that Deshawn Watson was a fish. I mean, apparently the refs also didn't realize for the amount of times that he flopped and they just called it roughing the passer. So who knows? This game wasn't some great game or even technically really a win for either team. They're both kind of mediocre. I mean, we saw Deshaun this week look like, I don't know, let's just say a mediocre quarterback. He must have gotten a massage this week. But honestly, on both sides of the ball, it was a mess. I mean, Trevor Lawrence, it seemed like he sometimes forgot that he was a 6'6 quarterback and was just kind of out there. I don't know how else to put it. He wasn't great. But to be fair to him, it seems like this game went the way of the rest of this NFL season. The O-line was horrible. He had no real protection, and mistakes were made all around. There was no time management, and the play calling was just crap. You would think they had addressed their biggest problem in the offseason, being their offensive line, but they just didn't. The Browns' defense looked good, and even some of their wide receivers didn't look horrible. I mean, Jerry Jeudy looked not bad. Last week, he didn't look bad. I mean, he's still dropping the ball, and most of their wide receivers are dropping the ball. But to be fair, Jeudy seemed like the best of the bunch. Deshaun Watson still had horrible throws. On some of those plays, he had multiple open receivers, and he was just throwing it wildly. He has no consistency. Like I said, he's basically a mediocre at best quarterback. They should have ran the ball more. And listen, I get that Nick Chubb is still out, who was their best offensive player. But they still have Ford, and Ford is a great running back, and he had a good game this week. But really, what won it for them was the fact that the Browns' defense and their special teams aren't bad. I mean, they have some of the best defensive players in the league. Myles Garrett is a beast. Zadarius Smith, another beast. And because of those defensive players and the special teams, they were able to squeak out a win. Not saying that's going to keep happening, because listen, it's the Browns, and the Browns are going to do Browns things. So don't get your hope up, Northeast Ohio. Okay. I hate even talking about this game. The Bengals and the Chiefs. This is the reason that people think the NFL is scripted. I mean, those refs are basically in the Chiefs' pocket. There were so many calls that just weren't made, and they're all against the Chiefs. Like, listen, this is the 4th game in a row that the Bengals-Chiefs game has been decided by a flag in the Chiefs' favor. Of course, people are going to assume the worst. Because why wouldn't they? Because it's not just the Bengals that this happens to. Week after week, that the refs just do not call as many penalties on the Chiefs, even though they are clear as day. Burrow had a really good game. I mean, especially coming off of last week where he looked like, God, I don't even know, a high school quarterback? Thankfully, that blonde is getting out of his system. The Chiefs played like crap. I mean, Mahomes had 2 interceptions and 3 turnovers. And honestly, for me, if they didn't have Chris Jones, this game would have ended differently. And of course, all the penalties that were called on the Bengals that weren't called on the Chiefs. Even Romo, and God, he is my favorite commentator. Justifying Mahomes throwing that ball into the dirt as part of the plan. And oh, by the way, part of the plan is also to give away all these yards. I don't know a single team in the NFL that goes into a game and is like, you know what? This time we should just give all these yards away. That's how we win the game. No. Mahomes had a ton of mistakes, and Kelsey wasn't great either. But of course, the Chiefs win, right? I hate saying this, but the loss for the Bengals is because of Chase. I know we didn't get to see the play because CBS has a hard on for the Chiefs and they just don't show it. And I'm sure the penalty was an actual penalty, but God, you guys could have won if it wasn't for that. Okay, my favorite game of the week, the Texans and the Bears. And guess what? The Bears still suck. It just seemed like the longest game in history. It was moving so slow, and I swear to you, this game could have been an email. It was also a weird mix of penalties and not penalties? I know that sounds weird, but I always thought that if you punch some guy in the face that you got ejected. Apparently that's not the rule anymore, and this isn't the only game that happened in this week. They had 21 combined penalties, but honestly, there were so many more. My favorite part of the game, though, was the Bears coach challenging Nico Collins' catch as being in bounds when he's literally 3 feet away, can see it, and everyone can see it in real time that he's in bounds. Like, you just wasted a challenge. The game should have been better for the Texans. I mean, this should have been closer to a blowout. They have a stronger passing and rushing game, but the penalties just killed them. God, with all this hype about the new Bears, and they in fact did not make any serious changes. I'm not really sure how this is new. This seems like the Bears for the last 35 years. Now, before I start, I am not a Caleb Williams fan. Obviously, I'm a Packer fan, and I think he's been overhyped to the wazoo. But the Bears did him a disservice. He should have had more playing time in the preseason. I mean, we all watched Hard Knocks. He wasn't even great in the practices. So they should have at least given him some time in those games. Because let's be honest, the NFL and college ball are two totally different games. He is missing easy throws, and he's not releasing the ball quick enough. It seems like he's playing some weird game of reverse hot potato, and he just can't read defenses. You can't blame him entirely, though. His offensive line is just Swiss cheese. I mean, I know they have new guys, old guys, but come on. Like, something's gotta give. You can't keep letting this kid get beat up the way he is, or else it's going to be another situation like Tua. The Bears' defense, still a great defense, but you can't win games with just your defense. So, yeah, the Bears lost. Listen, I'm just going to say one final thing about this game is that last throw that Caleb Williams threw was a catchable ball for the trainer on that sidelines. Okay, the Falcons and the Eagles. I almost didn't watch this game because I thought it was a guaranteed win for the Eagles. I mean, we all saw how Kirk Cousins looked last week. And I know Brown is out this week, but they still had Saquon Barkley, who last week ran around the Packers. So let's talk about Kirk. I mean, last week, he didn't even look like a mid quarterback. I even said that on last week's episode. And this week, he finally looked like the Kirk Cousins that I've seen with the Vikings. He wasn't perfect, but I mean, he never was, and never claimed to be. But honestly, I can't help but to root for him. He's such a nice guy. I don't think there's a nicer guy in the NFL. I also said last week that Jalen Hurts didn't look like the quarterback that he's supposed to be. And honestly, he still doesn't. I think he's just as overrated as Williams. The Eagles literally threw this game away twice in 2 minutes. And God, poor Saquon. You just can't beat the Giants out of him, can you? It wasn't all his fault, though. That play calling was bad. I thought last season the Eagles were overrated, that they were supposed to be this great team. And it felt like they fell off at week 10 last year and just haven't recovered yet. There's two other parts of this game that I want to talk about, and that's CJ Gardner-Johnson. Listen, this guy really must like getting punched in the face, because this isn't the first time that he's just instigated players until they hit him, and he stands there and takes it. There was no reason this week for him to grab McLeod's mouthpiece out of his mouth. I mean, even his own teammates have hit him. I think he would do really well in MMA. He'd just get into the ring, stand there and let people hit him and be like, "What, bitch?" The Eagles head coach, though, is so petty. I mean, the fact that Sirianni would not even shake Morris's hand, hell, he left the field before the end of the game so he wouldn't have to greet anybody. Everybody shakes hands at the end. It was just classless. And I mean, that's asking a lot of Sirianni because, let's be honest, he is classless. Okay, I'm going to talk about the Panthers a little bit, but let's call a spade a spade. I didn't watch the game. When teams are that bad, it's not fun to watch. It's actually kind of boring. Bryce Young is supposed to be one of these generational quarterbacks. Let's be honest, even last season, as a rookie, he had a horrible year. And he was in the same draft class as CJ Stroud. Hell, Bryce Young was the #1 pick overall. But I think putting all this pressure on these generational quarterbacks to be this godsend to these teams, it's a lot. And the fact that 2 games in, they've already benched him after all preseason and the last 2 weeks, spouting to any media outlet that they can that he's their guy, is kind of heartbreaking. Because he doesn't seem like a bad guy. He's just not a great NFL quarterback. And honestly, he wasn't that great of a college quarterback. He made some interesting plays and won games, but he wasn't consistent at all. So now they're benching him, which sucks. If it's any consolation, Baker and Darnold left the Panthers and went on to be actual quarterbacks. So there's still hope for Bryce Young. We'll see where he goes. Now, listen, I was prepping for my podcast today, and the news came out that Aaron Rodgers was voted as the NFL's most annoying quarterback. This is amazing. And the fact that they are calling him former Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers, not Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers, or even former State Farm spokesperson Aaron Rodgers, is hilarious to me. I'm a Packers fan. I'm supposed to be all about Aaron Rodgers. But the last 3 years that he was with our organization were a mess. Not on the field, but a mess. And he beat out Deshawn Watson and Travis Kelce for this role. It's great. And 3,000 fans voted for this. Even better. Check out our post later in the week and see what's going on. And go Pack Go! Thanks, guys.